Hi everybody, welcome to the fantastic meeting, and the event is Marxism Festival 2021 online event. My name is Naila Ashraf. I am a member of the SWP and I'm based here in Manchester, and I want to welcome you to this event. We've got an absolutely fantastic meeting ahead of us, and I can already see that we've almost got almost 400 people joining this meeting. Just goes to show the vast interest in the topic today, and the meeting title is Hate Johnson, Don't Trust Starmer. What strategy for socialism in Britain? Now, just to explain how we're going to run this meeting, we do have, like I said, a fantastic panel. We've got three great speakers, and what I'll do is I'll introduce each speaker as they're about to speak. They'll speak for 10 or so minutes each, and then what we'll do is we'll open up the virtual floor and allow people to make contributions and ask questions, and then we'll bring the speakers back in at the end to answer some of those. Obviously, we've got a lot of people here today, so we are going to, I know people are still joining, but we're going to start promptly because we want to get as many contributions, discussions here as possible. And when it comes to contributions, we're going to ask people to virtually raise their hands, and also to just say that obviously the chat is not available for security reasons, but if people do want to ask a question and don't feel comfortable raising their hands and speaking, I would suggest you do message the host, and we'll make sure we'll look at those. So with no further ado, I want to introduce our first speaker. Really pleased to introduce Jane Atkinson. She's the president of the Leeds Trades Council, and is also a former parliamentary candidate for the Labour Party in Pursley. So Jane, over to yourself.
Thanks, Naila. I just want to say to everyone, I spent most of yesterday, and I probably will spend most of today and tomorrow, pretty much glued to the rolling news channels. I guess we all did. And I was watching this slide that they had, which was the election tally, which was headed, "The State of the Parties." And it wasn't wrong, was it? Because they are a total state. Comrades, it's great to be here with you all today, because I know we all want the same things. We want better for our communities, for our workmates, for our families, and especially for our kids. And what a rough deal they are getting right now. And most of all, we want socialism, and we're all trying to achieve that in our own ways. Now, 10 years ago, I thought that the parliamentary road to socialism was a fairly unlikely path. And then in 2015, Jeremy Corbyn stood as leader of the Labour Party. Now, remember, he was not expected to win. At the time, I think that he stood, I think you could have got 200 to 1 betting odds on him actually winning. But people flooded back into the Labour Party to vote for him. And 6 months later, Labour had doubled in size. And of course, he did win. I was one of over 300,000 socialists who rejoined Labour or joined Labour to help him win. And he'd been on the right side of every campaign and every cause and every picket line. And he was absolutely the real deal, wasn't he? Within a year, though, the right wing mounted a coup to try and oust him, and that failed. And he never really managed to get control of the Parliamentary Labour Party or the staff of the Labour Party. And he was constantly firefighting and defending himself from the relentless right-wing attacks. And to be honest, comrades, he was too nice. In 2017, I was involved, like many of you, in the most inspiring election campaign. We got no help from the central party, so we just organised it locally. And there were enough of us to knock every single door, and there was so much enthusiasm and so much hope. I spent every weekend on a council estate in Keighley, knocking where they had a UKIP councillor and a Tory MP. Now, towards the end, we were convincing people who had never actually voted to take a chance on Jeremy. We even had to explain to people how to physically vote. They didn't know where the polling station was, what would happen when they got in there, and how to vote. We won Keighley by 250 votes. And that was the key difference in 2017. 10% of Jeremy's voters in 2017 had never voted for anyone before. Labour gained seats and had the biggest swing towards Labour since 1945. And if we had just had 4 more days of campaigning, we would have won a majority for Labour and Jeremy would have been in number 10. So I gave up my job and I moved house in order to stand to be the Labour MP in Pudsey, an area that I'd worked in all of my life. Not because I wanted to be an MP, I don't really know why anyone would, but because I vowed I would do whatever I could to get that man and his policies, socialist policies, into power. Now, trust, as we all know from our personal lives, it's hard to earn and it's very easy to lose. And it's exactly the same for us in politics. On the doorstep, I met NHS staff who felt betrayed by Labour privatisations. I met council workers who knew that the public sector pay freeze that they had been suffering for years had been started by Labour, and people who felt that all politicians were the same. Popular policies in the manifesto, like free education and like nationalisation of all the utilities, along with my personal pledge that I would only take half of the MP's wage and donate the rest back to good causes locally, managed to cut through and restore some of that trust locally. People were coming towards us, but unfortunately that trust was destroyed by Labour's reversal of the 2017 position on Brexit. The position that Starmer forced through on Brexit was what cost us the 2019 election. And then MPs who'd rode high on Corbyn's coattails couldn't wait to stab him in the back, and some Labour MPs couldn't contain their glee as other Labour MPs lost their seats in 2019. Starmer was then elected on the back of his 10 pledges, worth having a look at those again, and endorsements from the like of Doreen Lawrence and Ricky Tomlinson. And he portrayed himself as a popular socialist. But unfortunately, neither his promised popularity nor his socialism have proved to be true. Voters have felt utterly taken for granted. In some northern heartlands, that's been building up for a long, long time. But most recently, BAME voters who gave their vote to Corbyn in record numbers because they knew that Corbyn always had their back, they have felt a rapid loss of trust in Starmer. At the height of the pandemic, when Johnson was literally letting the bodies pile high, voters were saying Starmer could not have done a better job. Now, this was not an endorsement of Johnson. This was a damning indictment of Starmer. But still, he didn't change course. He's doffed his cap to Johnson, wrapped himself in the flag and announced no new policies. Nobody really knows what Starmer stands for, but they do know that whatever Johnson has done, Starmer has stood by and let him. In the last week or so, when actually Johnson started to be on the ropes around the issue of the bodies piled high comments and also about the corruption around the refurbishment of his flat, Starmer did start to attack him, but not on the substantive issues, not on the real issues, but about his lack of loyalty for shopping at John Lewis. Now, I take no pleasure in the diabolical election results that we're seeing because real people will suffer the real results of electing more heartless Tories. More results, including in my own area in Leeds, are still being counted, and some are not as bad. They're mitigated by good local candidates who've worked incredibly hard. In Hartlepool, we saw Thelma Walker, a good socialist, put forward all the correct policies, and she picked up only 250 votes for the Northern Independence Party. I think this shows us how difficult it is for new parties to break through. Many of us have been there and got that t-shirt, and we know that it's a small and uncomfortable and unpopular t-shirt, isn't it? And that's why the right didn't all leave and join Change UK when Corbyn was in control. The historic Labour name is incredibly valuable, so left and right both want it. So where next for socialists? Well, at its height, Labour had over 500,000 members, and some have left, but it's still at around 400,000 today. And the left are still in the majority in the Labour Party. Neither left nor right have got confidence in Starmer right now. It's only a matter of time until there is a leadership election. The left must be ready, and above all, the left must be organised. We must organise within the trade unions to win them for the left. The Unison NEC elections are going on right now, and the left must win them. Their General Secretary election where there were 3 left candidates and the combined left vote would have defeated the right-wing winner, shows us what we must not do. The Unite leadership election that's going on right now is absolutely vital. We must keep control of Unite for the left, but the left also we must have a political winner who will challenge Starmer. Sharon says that she won't be political. Turner says he won't pick fights with Starmer. Only Howard Beckett seems prepared to square up to Starmer, and he's the one who will be getting my vote. I think in typical decent fashion, the left have given Starmer absolutely every opportunity to succeed. They haven't been too hard on him. On the contrary, they've been too soft on him. And I think the gloves have to come off now. The left could take back control of Labour. The question is, do they have the will and do they have the determination? Because they do have the numbers. Well, I say they have to find that. They have to find that now. I was really inspired, and I'm sure you were too, to see how people would fight tooth and nail for Corbyn. So I'm absolutely sure that if we can get a really good socialist leader and a good socialist campaign putting forward socialist policies, people will come out fighting again. But above all, we need unity, left unity, because the left is terribly fractured. As trade unionists, we all know that unity is our strength. We absolutely have to learn that lesson politically. I'm the national vice chair of an organisation called Don't Leave Organise, which is seeking to bring together left organisations and trade unions within the Labour Party with some success. And that's the key task now for us, and I'm on with that. By the end of the year, I'm pretty sure we will have a new Labour leader. So we have to organise now to make sure that it's one who will provide strong opposition to the Tories, promote the popular socialist policies of the 2019 manifesto, and value the trade unions who have proved so vital in COVID Britain. Then I know, comrades, that together we can win. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Jane. That was fantastic. For those of you that joined late, we have got 3 speakers and I'll introduce each one as they come. So our second speaker is Mark Serwotka. He's the General Secretary of the PCS Trade Union, which stands for Public and Commercial Services Union, which represents civil servants. So Mark, over to yourself.
Thanks very much. And it's a pleasure to share a platform with Jane. I had pleasure in spending some time with Jane, who was an excellent candidate in that general election as she referred to. I'm also delighted to speak on this panel. I just want to say that certainly in my own union, I think the SWP are playing a very progressive role in trying to advance the many struggles that we face in PCS, and their comrades play a critical role every day in the many battles that we are facing and will have to face. So in 12 minutes, or 10 to 12 minutes, it's only possible, I think, to skirt on some of the issues. I suspect that there will be an awful lot that the 3 speakers agree on, but there are going to be some differences that I think will also come out, and I look forward to hearing the discussion. So what are the key things that I want to try and touch on? The first one is that we face the same struggles today as we faced on Wednesday. So irrespective of the election results last night, the struggles are the same. And there are many struggles that we need to mobilize to get involved in. Second point, I think it is a dead end if those of us on the left now have a debate about whether socialists should be in or out of the Labour Party. I choose currently to be in. Many socialists that I admire greatly choose to be out. The key issue is not whether you're in or out of the Labour Party, it is whether we are mobilising and fighting in unity against the onslaught that we currently face. Thirdly, whilst the election results last night will be pored over, it is a mistake to uniformly interpret them that we are one country, all in the same situation, and not notice that there are some huge inherent differences. Yes, it's clear in large swathes of England, Labour did disastrously and the Tories have done far better than anybody would expect. However, I would argue that in Scotland, the election results will produce one of the big class struggles to come up in the next few years over the Scottish people's right to self-determination and independence. In Wales, Labour have just had the best election results in any election in 22 years. And in England, whilst overall there are many, many setbacks, there are still some areas above the trend. So it's a mistake to just simply interpret these results, I would say, as overwhelmingly catastrophic. It would also be a mistake, I think, not to realise that inherent in some of those differences in the different parts of the UK will see some of the most explosive struggles that socialists need to get behind. Fifthly, and something we may not get agreement on, I now believe that for all those socialists who have opted out of the argument, the battle for proportional representation in our electoral system is a key one for socialists to engage in, because it is not an academic subject for Anna Aguirre's. It is a key issue as to whether socialists can battle in all parts of the country and see their efforts reflected in those election results. Sixthly, I want to touch very briefly on the dangers and weaknesses currently inherited in the left, some of which Jane referred to, but I want to particularly talk about the dangers of sectarianism and the dangers of the left in not understanding that class is the key thing that should unite and feature all our battles moving forward. And there are some dangers, to my mind, about the embracement of uncritical support for identity politics that I think could be a dreadful dead end for many on the left. And finally, I think we have to also accept that wherever we stand on some of the issues that we differ on, we must accept that the last decade has seen the working class generally, and particularly the trade unions, fail in mobilizing people to meet up to the challenges post-austerity after the financial crash. And if we don't learn the lessons, we'll see us fail again in the post-pandemic challenges that are coming our way. So quickly moving on, struggles, there are many. And my answer to the question, what strategy for socialists in Britain, is we should all decide after today, if we haven't already been doing it, and I'm sure most of us have, is to get involved in the many struggles we face, both local and national. Just looking at a quick perusal across the trade union movement, there are some key battles currently going on. Fire and rehire, 40 days of strike action by GMB members against the obscenity that allows employers to fire people and re-engage them on inferior contracts. It is a disgrace that Keir Starmer has failed to sign the Unite letter that condemns and calls for a change in the law. We have strikes in unions non-TUC affiliated that are inspirational, whether they are Deliveroo drivers in the IWGB or the numerous private sector workers in United Voices of the World. We have to learn from those struggles and embrace them and see more of that in the big traditional TUC affiliates. We have RMT members in ScotRail voting for 6 weeks of strike action over pay, UCU members in countless areas across HE and FE voting to struggle against cuts in education, including in Leicester currently with a call for a global academic boycott. We see Unite members in Serco enforcement officers fighting trade union victimisation, and in my own union, we see in the DVLA in Swansea 8 days already of strike action, further strike action to take place in the week of the 17th of May and in the week of the 24th of May. On top of that, there are huge attacks coming to the organised trade union movement over the questions of the public sector pay freeze, attacks on our pensions and redundancies. Add into that those struggles that should involve and have unions at their core, but are not necessarily exclusively focused as trade union struggles. We see the fight for Black Lives Matter. We see the fight to oppose the police and crime bill. We will see the struggle for self-determination in Scotland. We see huge issues arising in Ireland. And we see the battles that we need to engage in, whether they are fighting for a decent welfare state, fighting for decent sick pay, for proper funding of the NHS, for proper education, decent housing, or for equality. So my point being, there are many, many struggles that we need to engage in. And the key question about how we engage in them is not determined by whether you are a Labour Party member or not. In terms of recognizing that those are the key struggles, I just want to say something about why I think the struggle for proportional representation is one that socialists should stop opting out of. For far too long, this has seemed to be something that has not been an issue for the left. But if we look at recent election results, what they tell us is if we are interested in seeing the left make progress, they tell us that the case for PR should be a critical one for socialists to engage in. Let's just look at Labour's election results and statistics since 1951. In 1951, Labour had the highest percentage turnout in any general election. 48.8% of people voted Labour. In 1983, under Michael Foot, that had dropped to 27.6%. If you go through the Blair, Brown, Miliband and Corbyn years, they tell us that in 2017, Jeremy Corbyn got 40% of the vote, 5 million votes more than Gordon Brown achieved. And yet, what we see even in the last election, rightly considered a huge defeat for Labour, where only 202 MPs were elected, Corbyn still got 32.1% of the vote, which was higher than Labour achieved in 2010 or in 2015. What this actually tells us is our electoral system in no way relates to the amount of votes being cast. I mean, in large parts of the UK, many people cannot see the point in voting because under our current system, it is not going to make a change. That is something now that we should embrace in, because it is the way that socialists can seek to engage people wherever they live and tell them that election campaigns, participation and voting is key. We also need to reflect on the fact, as Jane has said, other than in 1953, when the Labour Party had 1 million members, it is a fact that in 2018, under Jeremy Corbyn, 552,000 people joined Labour, whereas in 2015, Labour had a mere 198,000. Therefore, what we can see from that is that the Corbyn period enthused and engaged many, many people, many young people, to join Labour and fight, but many people still chose not to go down that route. For me, what it tells us is the struggle for proportional representation is an important one, but actually you don't judge a socialist credentials by whether they're in the Labour Party or not. You judge them as to whether they're on picket lines, organising in their trade union, supporting Black Lives Matter, the general fight for equality and against discrimination. And that must be the strategy, it seems to me now, for socialists moving forward. But I now just want to conclude with two things that I think also require us to seriously debate on the left. And that is about being honest about our weaknesses, about where we have differences and how they are exploited ruthlessly by the right. The first danger Jane has referred to is sectarianism. Anyone who's taken even a cursory glance at the votes achieved by the trade union and socialist coalition in this election will tell you it is a sectarian dead end, more about a small left organisation seeking to recruit to its ranks rather than being a key for socialists to engage with. That sectarianism, however, is not to be sneered at. It can be dangerous. In my own union, PCS, we see that sectarianism currently mean that some comrades in the Socialist Party are currently undermining an industrial dispute of members of the DVLA in Swansea over health and safety because they put building their own organisation above the struggle of workers fighting for a safe workplace. Jane is also right that in union after union, divisions on the left have meant that the right make gains because the left is split, and that is something that is in all of our interests to seek to speak out against. But we also have to, I think, recognise that in the struggle for equality and against all forms of racism, sexism and discrimination, we should recognise that all of those struggles are built and supported by socialists. But it is important to remember that socialists must be able to be critical around some of the issues around identity politics, which are holding back, mobilising many, many people, many of whom are genuine socialists, and that the real way of assessing people's commitment to fighting for equality and against discrimination is not by looking at who signs what pledges, it is not by looking at who are the social media warriors, it is demonstrated by how we mobilise in unity in struggle. And comrades, I think we have to recognise there is a tendency creeping in parts of the left that is seeking to no platform and shout down people who have differences that has no place in our movement whatsoever. It is particularly surfaced in the struggle for women's rights. And I think we as socialists should recognise that all those who want to fight oppression and discrimination should be worked with and debated, and that no platforming has no place for those other than fascists, and that has been a tradition in our movement that I think we should go back to recognise, because the dangers are that it is exploited by the right and it stops us from winning struggles. My final point. A lot of us will agree, I think, in most of what we say, but the key thing for me after this meeting is action. And for me, the issue would be wrong to obsess, not only about Labour, but also as to say that now we start obsessing about the next general election. I'll put my cards on the table. When the next general election comes, it matters to every single person in this country whether Labour or the Tories win, and to pretend otherwise is a mistake. But to obsess now about the election will demobilise the struggles that we need to join in. And my finishing point is in the trade unions and in our communities. Those struggles need active engagement by socialists. We can win those struggles, and that will be the biggest advance for socialists in Britain in the next few years if we turn the Tories back rather than carry on in the way that many people have conducted themselves in the last period. Thank you.
Final speaker is Charlie Kimber. He's the editor of Socialist Worker and is also the Joint National Secretary of the SWP. Charlie.
Thank you, Naila. And can I say it's a pleasure to speak on the same platform as Jane and Mark, comrades who I've shared picket lines, demonstrations and much else with. And this is an urgent debate that we need to have. The election results are not uniform, as Mark said, but there's no doubt that they are a severe step back for the Labour Party. They will be used by the right to further embolden a corrupt, murderous and rancid Tory government. They will think they can get away with anything. They piled the bodies high and they've managed to survive the electoral test. And that is a big step back for all of us. It's also a destruction of the argument that what Labour needed to do was to get rid of Jeremy Corbyn and then they would soar high in the electoral stakes. You may have seen Lord Adonis yesterday attacking Starmer from the right. There's a quote from Lord Adonis on the 17th of December on 2019, just after the last general election. I lost count of how many people told me on the doorstep they wouldn't vote Labour because of Jeremy Corbyn. A lot of them went on to say, but if Keir Starmer was your leader, I would vote for you. Well, that has been entirely exploded by the experience of the 6th of May. And I know what's coming next. Ed Owen, a former New Labour special advisor, a man entirely enmeshed with the corporations these days, laid it on thuggishly and clearly. For 10 years, the Labour Party has allowed, encouraged even, an abundance of malcontents, idealists, refuseniks to inhabit it. The party became an escape from the tough reality of electoral politics, a retreat to a warm comfort zone where we despise the Tories, sneer at our country's flag and pontificate about Palestine and Venezuela. Recovery means ruthless about getting the party back into shape, even if it means losing half the membership and others along the way. That's the programme that I think in some form will be taken up by the Labour right and probably by Keir Starmer as well. Even though his plan, more royalist, more entranced by the Union Jack, more committed to generals, admirals, air chief marshals, spies and torturers, utterly failed in the electoral test. But let's get on to the real points here. Keir Starmer is an easy target for the sorts of people that come to this meeting. Keir Starmer is a useful excuse, because if the only problem is Keir Starmer, then we can call off the chase. All we have to do is wait for the next leadership election, hope that we can get the left in again and begin to rebuild the same things that existed before. But I'm sorry, I don't think replaying the experience of Jeremy Corbyn is enough for us to look at. Firstly, because I don't believe the Labour right are ever going to let it happen again. I think they will fiddle it. I think they will block people. I think they will find ways of preventing any left-winger becoming the leader of the Labour Party again. But in addition, if you look at the record of what happened under Corbyn, it's not good enough. The problem is it was, of course, a huge boost to the whole of the left. It meant an important step forward to be able to argue socialist ideas. It gave millions of people hope and enthused them to become political activists. But the idea that the unity of the Labour Party was crucial meant that Corbyn and those who supported him never attacked the Labour right. Not a single one of those rotten MPs was removed or deselected. And because of that, they were let free to stab Corbyn in the back. And the reason for that was not the personal failings of Jeremy Corbyn or John McDonnell. The reason was because of this idea that we have to hold the left and right together, and therefore we need to make compromises. Why was it that Jeremy Corbyn twice went into a general election with a program for the renewal of Trident nuclear missiles, not because he believes in it, but because he thought it was a necessary concession towards the Labour right and the right-wing trade union leaders, and some of the left-wing trade union leaders as well. So I'm not for just replaying that experience, because I also know that if we look outside Britain, we can see that even when a party of the Corbyn type is elected to office, the record is not great. We can see what happened to Syriza in Greece after its election in 2015. The hope of Europe, the idea it was going to fight austerity, constrained by the bankers, by the big financial institutions, by the European Union, by the local bosses. Within months of its election, it had held a referendum on whether to accept austerity measures. And then even when people rejected those measures, it implemented a worse austerity program than that of its predecessors. Look at Pablo Iglesias of Podemos, who stepped down from politics this week. Podemos, out of the great movements against austerity in 2014, but soon moving to the right, ending up in a coalition with the right-wing Labour Party and pushing through attacks on the working class during COVID, which are on a par with those of Boris Johnson. So I don't think it's good enough to say, please, can we replay that position again? I think we have to end the fakery of a dead end masquerading as a highway to heaven. We have to say that staying constrained by Labourism and the Labour Party is not good enough. I'll tell you, one of the things I missed at the ballot box on Thursday was the chance to vote for a left-winger. And I saw there was a Corbyn on the London mayor ballot election, but it was Piers Corbyn, not Jeremy Corbyn, who was on that ballot paper. Now, I think if Jeremy Corbyn had reacted to the fact that he is not even allowed to be a Labour MP, let's be clear about that, the man who led the party into the 2019 election is not allowed to be a Labour MP, and there is precious little response to it from inside the Labour Party. If he had broken from it and said, me and the people who support me and some good trade union leaders and some good parliamentary candidates, some of whom might be in this meeting today, were prepared to stand with me, of course, it's entirely possible that because of the electoral system, because of the way the thing works, he might not have got elected. But I also know that it would have transformed the sorts of debates that we are having. That's not a sectarian point. It's about recognizing that if the Labour left used its strengths, used its capacities, used its energies in a way that broke from the Labour Party, it would change the argument around the sorts of elections that we have been happening. But I also want to say that the key question is not about elections. The key question is whether what dominates and disciplines our politics is struggle in the streets and the workplaces, or whether Parliament dominates it. And here, comrades, we have some good news. We're very good on the left of telling ourselves how awful things are. But there is some good news as well. The Black Lives Matter movement in America and across the world changed the way that people thought about racism and anti-racism. Because 26 million people took to the streets in America, the biggest ever social movement that we have seen in that country, it changed the debate. And it meant that Derek Chauvin was convicted of the murder of George Floyd as well. The tremendous risings of school students and of Extinction Rebellion and others have changed the argument about the existence of climate change and about the necessity for action in a way that no parliamentary movement has ever done. The people fighting in the streets and the workplaces of Myanmar and of Colombia at the moment, the people who have fought in Chile and the Yellow Vests in France and in Bolivia and in Iraq and Iran and Sudan and in Hong Kong and Algeria and Catalonia and many, many other places are the real hope of how we can change society. That's why what's happening over the Kill the Bill movement at the moment is important as well. And Mark's right, whether you're for those struggles or not is a key question. But it's also true that we need to have a political movement that pulls those people together and says it's not enough just to struggle. We have to say how those struggles are going to be successful and how they're going to go on to change society. Because unfortunately, if there is not such a political movement, the politics it coheres around is that of the existing forces, of the social democratic forces, and those who will constrain the movement and not allow it to burst through and to fundamentally alter the system. And I think we need such an organization. And I don't think the SWP is the finished article of this. Of course I don't. I don't think it's just a matter of us recruiting a few more people every week and then eventually we'll be big enough to transform society. That's not the argument. The argument is we need a set of revolutionary politics which looks at our strengths in the streets and the workplaces. And we also need to say that we shouldn't be frightened by this argument that we've all now become too woke, that now we've all become too far apart from ordinary working class people. The truth is, most working class people in the last 30 years have become far, far more progressive around questions on racism and sexism and homophobia. And I am not going to stop arguing for trans rights any more than I'm going to stop arguing for women's liberation and for anti-racism. And I think we need to have a party that brings together struggle and resistance in the streets and the workplaces and a determination not to give in around the questions of oppression, fundamentally because oppression, racism, transphobia, LGBT plus phobia, all of those questions divide the working class and enable our ruling class to be able and successful in the struggle against us. So I think we need to be ruthless about Starmer. I think we need to recognise how the Labour right have let people down and have allowed the Tories to win. But I also think we need to go on to criticise the tradition of Labourism and talk about political organisation based on struggle from below. Thank you.